Welcome to our fourth webinar on online abuse in sport. My name is Gary Sinclair, and this webinar series is presented jointly by the FIA, DCU, and the United Against Online Abuse Coalition. We have an exciting lineup of speakers over the next few months. We haven't stopped during the summer. So, for example, we have Dunya Antonovich from the University of Minnesota, who will be presenting on the 20th of August, and Dr. Itowitz Rodrigo from Loughborough University in September. So please look out for any communications concerning them. Whereas for today, for July, we're delighted to have two speakers today. We have Dr. Daniel Kilvington from Leeds Beckett University and Sue Paris, who's an emotional welfare specialist within professional football and the founder of Simply Human and the Changing Room. So they're going to be presenting the work they've been doing as part of the Tackling Online Hate in Football network. The work concerns online harms as experienced by current and former professional men and women and academy level footballers in England, I think mostly England. Drawn on a sample size of, I think, over 120 players, they'll be discussing common types and triggers of online harms, how abuse impacts players' personal and professional lives, and how the football industry is attempting to manage the crisis. So in the meantime, I'll hand you over to the capable hands of Sue and Dan. Thanks very much for taking the time to present your work today.
Yeah, and thanks very much for having us. Yeah, it's our pleasure. Yeah, and also thanks everybody for joining today. I know it's an incredibly hot day as well, so just what you want is to be possibly inside listening to us chatting about online abuse. So thanks very much for joining. Yeah, so I'm gonna kick off and do the first kind of 20-25 minutes or so, and then I'm gonna hand over to Sue, who's going to talk through some of her work and what we can do to challenge the issues that we face. So that's the both of us. I'm a reader at Leeds Beckett University, basically means associate professor, and I write and research around race, ethnicity, anti-racism within sport, and been delighted to work with Gary and the team on the Tackling Online Hate in Football project over the last few years as well. And basically this presentation is going to outline some of the qualitative findings that we've found in terms of the players and the impact that online abuse has on the players as well. I'm going to start with a very, very quick word on terminology. So I'm going to try and outline the difference between online abuse, online hate, and online harms. They're often conflated and interchanged, but they are slightly different. So I'm going to start by giving a brief definition. Then we're going to go through the methodology. And Gary mentioned it's over 120 players that we've interviewed, including focus groups as well. It's, I believe, 126 players in total, which I believe is unprecedented. I don't think there's any other research out there that's got that kind of data set and data size that we have. I'm going to run through the research questions as well. So what is it specifically that we wanted to know through these interviews with the players? Then I'm going to show a slide about overarching themes. So basically 10 overarching things that kind of came out of the interviews generally. Then we'll go into types of abuse, hate, and harms that came out of that, and then the impact that these forms of abuse had on the players in terms of their general experiences. And as I said, Sue is then kind of ending the presentation about kind of 20 minutes or so talking about football response and what needs to happen going forward. And then hopefully we should have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for a bit of a Q&A. So if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or at the end just unmute and then ask what the question is. Okay, so first things first, what is online abuse? Well, this is from a forthcoming article that's coming out, I think, this year. It's essentially abuse. We can refer to it as one-off or prolonged offensive or hurtful remarks, behaviours or actions which do not necessarily link to somebody's protected characteristics. So it's abuse generally wouldn't constitute a criminal act, but obviously sometimes it of course can. But that's the difference between abuse and hate speech. Hate speech is where we're generally talking about somebody's protected characteristics. Okay, so there's a differentiation there. So the abuse that players might likely receive might be, you're crap, you're not fit to wear the shirt, all that type of stuff. It's not against that an identity. It's about performance. So it's general forms of abuse. Then we look at online hate, and this is a definition of online hate that's not necessarily linked to online. This is hate speech generally. So spreading or inciting or promoting hatred, violence, or discrimination against an individual or group based on their protected characteristics. There's some chatting. I'm going to mute that. There we go. So it refers to protected characteristics such as race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, among other identity markers as well. So that's what we refer to when we think of hate speech, and that online, obviously, those types of comments and behaviours are within an online context on social media, for example. And the third one, and this is something that's come out of the project the more we've got into it. So as we've kind of gone into our second and third year, and we've started to analyze the data, not only the qualitative, but the quantitative as well, we start to see online harms. And this is a broader definition, which encompasses more than just abuse and hate. So within Reach PLC, who are doing a lot of great work around protecting sports journalists and journalists in general from online abuse, they would use the term harms, which is, again, more all-encompassing. So yes, it can encompass abuse and hate, but it's a broader term, and it also includes other harmful activities that can occur online, such as doxing. So trying to find malicious content and try and get somebody sacked or try and get them in trouble is known as doxing. We've got sextortion, and again, that's some of the experiences from our players linked to that as well, which I'll talk through a little bit later. Bribery, again, some of the players that we've interviewed have attempted to have been bribed as well. Catfishing, so luring personnel to a particular place under false pretenses, and also swarming as well. So online harms is a slightly more holistic term, and the more we've got involved in this research, we've found that it's not simply limited to abuse or hate. There's more harmful kind of issues that we see in relation to football. Okay, so our approach. So this is very, very quickly going to outline what our methodological approach was. And as I said before, I'm completely unaware if any other research project out there has managed to get a sample as big as 126 for a qualitative study, as well as the quantitative data that we also have as well, which is around 50 million tweets across 4 tournaments across 12 years. But in terms of the qualitative aspect, we've conducted semi-structured interviews, most of which are via Teams or Zoom, and focus groups with around 5 or 6 professional football clubs. And that totals around about 126 participants who've been involved. The people involved in the study, therefore professional footballers, ex-professional footballers, and academy players between the ages of 16 to 21 or 16 to 18 years old in men and women's football. The players are across these various leagues, so the Premier League, Championship, League One, League Two, and Women's Championship. We also have current and former international players within that 126 participant sample. And we'd like to think that it's quite a diverse sample and demographic that we have, especially in terms of age and gender and race and ethnicity and nationality as well. One thing that we should probably flag up at this stage is we don't have as many women in the sample as we'd like. So we're still trying to make inroads. And if anybody on the call has connections or networks within the women's game that we could tap into, that would be brilliant. We would certainly like to get women's voices in there. Amani, I'm just going to mute that. Okay. So research questions. So these are the kind of 3 overarching things that we were trying to look for in terms of the research. So the first one is, what are the common triggers motivating online hate and abuse? So is that flashpoints in games? Is that transfer stories. What are the common things that trigger um, online hate, online abuse? The second thing was around really the impact, and this is where we're trying to tread new ground in terms of the study and the project, which is really to look at the experiences of the players to understand the impact it has on mental health and well-being, confidence, performance, well-being, all that type of stuff. So what impact is this online abuse having on the players? How do they experience it? How do they live through this? And the third and final bit was really around the stakeholders and clubs. So what is it that clubs are doing to challenge online hate and abuse? So we've got further data coming out of that, and Sue is definitely going to be speaking through that towards the end. And again, speaking about the excellent work that Sue does in that space as well. Okay, so overarching themes that have come out of the research, and then I'll get into showing some um, testimonies as well after this as well. So overarching themes. The first thing on the top left-hand side is many players simply expect it, and not only expect it, just accept it, which is very sad to see. Online abuse for some of the players we've spoken to a lot of the players just becomes part of the game. Fans have always shared their frustrations in the stands. They've always shared their opinions and views. And online social media just makes it more accessible to see those types of those comments and fan reactions. So for many players out there, it's just expected that at some point when they're playing badly, they're going to face online abuse, or if they get a flashpoint or a trigger in a game, such as a red card, a missed penalty, they just expect that they will get it. And to some extent, some of the players almost trivialize it, that it's just part and parcel of the game now. The other work that we've done as part of the TOHIF project, we've worked with sport media organisations and sports journalists, and they say exactly the same thing, that it's just something that is part of the job now, and you just need to deal with it. Now, obviously, it is a part of the game, as we can see, and again, our quantitative research shows that, and other research as well has documented the extent to which online abuse happens and online hate. But really, players shouldn't accept it. This shouldn't be right. So again, the likes of TOHIF and other organisations out there are trying to change things here in this space. The second one across, most abuse, certainly in men's football, the vast majority is kind of performance related. So not good enough, rubbish, insert swear words, those types of things. Not necessarily linked to the players' identities, so not necessarily linked to the players' race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, you name it. And now I've put in certainly in men's football there because the differentiation is between women's football. Women's football, as we've seen in our interviews and also other research as well, they're more likely to get more homophobia and homophobic abuse online. And it's more about body image and sexualization than in the men's game. So there are differences between those two. And the third one across is around harm. So as I said earlier, sextortion, bribery, death threats to players' family members, friends. Again, those are it's not hate, it is type of abuse, but it's more harmful activity that we're seeing. The fourth one, which is a really under-researched area, which has come out of the project, is gambling-related harms. And that's evident. And we've seen that, especially for younger players, on the fringes of making their first team debuts, they tend to be targeted by those gambling and putting money on them to let's say miss a penalty or get a yellow card or a red card. And they usually send, or some players are sent direct messages before they go out and play. Now, a player has to then disclose that information to the head of safeguarding or player care before they go out on the pitch. And if they don't, and they're found to have seen that message and then gone on to get a yellow or red card, they can then face a lengthy ban as a result. So that a lot of younger players, again, those on the periphery of making their first team debuts and starting to play in the first team, start to get a lot of gambling related DMs, which is causing tension for the young players, which is an issue, but is absolutely under researched. So, again, as part of TOEIF, we're trying to tap into some further funds beyond the project to actually look specifically at gambling related online harms, which, as I said, is certainly under researched. And from the gambling organizations and stakeholders that I've been speaking to over the last few months, they suggest, and this is their words, they suggest that women's football has a bigger problem in terms of online abuse directed at women's players in relation to gambling than in the men's game. So it'd be good to kind of dig into that a little bit more and try and understand what's going on in that space. Also, on the fifth on the right hand side, we've got many players, notably in the men and boys game, tend to dismiss it. There's a type of hypermasculinity that exists where it's shrugged off. It doesn't affect me. If you talk about online abuse and how it might affect you, it's seen as a weakness. So they don't go to the manager, the coach. They tend to suppress it, which is obviously certainly an issue. Again, as part of TOEIF in our future work, we've got some ideas around innovative solutions in terms of pedagogic approaches to enable players to open up, especially young men and boys to open up around their feelings and emotions around this. So that's something we're hoping to do in the few years to come. Other side of the screen, again into the bottom row now. So players struggle more with online abuse when it's witnessed by family and friends. As I'm going to show in the next couple of slides, some family and friends actually scroll looking for it and then inform the player themselves and say, have you seen what people are saying around you? Also, some family members and mothers, for example, of the players, they've been particularly targeted and even sent death threats. And this is when players start to struggle more, not when it's about them, but when it's about somebody that's close to them that starts to be affected as well. That's when they actually really need to start seeking help from club and speaking about this more. The next one along is some players search for online conversations. And this was seen as two ends of the spectrum, really. So when players are playing really well, they look to see what people are saying about them in a positive way. So they go out and search for it. So they search their handles, they search their hashtags to try and find out what people are saying about them. It's a nice confidence and ego boost. And a lot of the players said that it's generally positive overall. Although one player described it as very much a love-hate relationship. Other players, when they're playing badly, they end up being dragged into looking online and searching their names and seeing what people are saying about them, which certainly isn't good for mental health and well-being, especially when they're being criticised in many messages. The next one in the middle on the bottom is most players know the processes at the club. So most players are aware of what to do if they're getting abused. They know where to go. They know who to speak to. But in many cases, they decide not to unless something is getting really bad. So again, goes back to what I said previously, which is stand back, try and dismiss it, just think it's part of the game. Don't open up because you might be seen as weak. But they are aware generally of who they should speak to in the club, which is positive. Unfortunately, though, across the piece, and again, my other research looked at this previously, has found that a lot of clubs are generally under-resourced regarding online abuse. And the personnel who are in charge of dealing with complaints of online abuse or online hate or online harms, sometimes they're not necessarily trained in EDI, so equality, diversity, inclusion. They might not have a background in that space. So the nuances around hate speech or racism or misogyny or ableism, they might not necessarily be aware of what is what and what to do with that information. And in many cases, especially in League One and League Two, where they are under-resourced as clubs, there's a lack of provision around it in this space. There's a lack of training, education, and more support is needed in that space. It's usually left to one or two people, which can be an issue. Again, across the piece, finally, training generally in football is very much around how to use it, how to be on there, potentially how to mute things, and technical things that the players can do. But it's not necessarily based around how to cope with it once abuse might start coming your way. And I think that we've got to be more proactive in football, and we've got to start thinking, what training mechanisms and resources can we bring in to ensure that when players might end up in that situation when they face online hostility, how can they learn to cope with that? Who can they speak to get that kind of support? What are the coping mechanisms that we can teach through? And that goes back to, again, Sue's work around emotional well-being, which is so vital and so important. Okay. Right. So as we go into this, so types of abuse and harm. So over the next few slides, I'm just going to showcase some of the interviewee transcripts and some of the nuggets that we've got from the interviewees that we've spoken to. So this is a testimony from a professional women's footballer, and even though this is on the types of abuse and harms page, it could certainly fall into hate, as it is around kind of body image, sexualization, how they looked. So she basically says here that many of her teammates didn't actually want to go on social media because of the comments they were getting, made around their body and how they looked. So from her perspective, it was very much around how they looked, their body style or body image, rather than how they were actually playing. So it wasn't about performance; it was more about how they looked, which was certainly an issue. And if we actually look across into other sports, we look at cricket, for example. The international cricketer Sarah Glenn has spoken out recently about this as well, saying that when she's playing a game and she decides to wear makeup, there's usually a lot of comments around her wearing makeup. And she's also said that in a lot of games, there tends to be a discussion around rate her attractiveness. So again, those are the differences between how men and women's sport is perceived. Women and some women are certainly more sexualized, and it's more about the body and how they look rather than the actual performance on the pitch. The next one, so the second one down here, and this is a former professional men's footballer, and this is around blackmail. So this falls into the harms category, harmful online content. So this person said, it's like people trying to blackmail you, like accounts. They try to and pretend to be a girl, and then they try and set you up and then put it all over social media. So I mean, it's like they've just got to be careful. So don't really entertain it. So these are the things that players certainly should be made aware of in advance of making their first team debut, or even when they're in the academy system, because there are scams, there are blackmailers out there as well. And another player at an academy club that we've spoken to was actually involved in a sextortion case. The club dealt with it as soon as it was disclosed, but this was a very worrying time for the player in question. The player in question had sent a reply back to basically a scammer with a picture of his face. His face was then superimposed onto another image, and then he was threatened and blackmailed, and the photo ended up being released. So this is becoming a frequent occurrence for players out there. And again, clubs need to be aware of this in terms of protecting the players against this type of scamming and blackmailing, especially we're on the periphery of the first team and starting to make a name for themselves. The final one at the bottom here relates to gambling, as I said before. So this player in question basically said that he opened his direct messages after a game and said, "I bet on you to score like £1,000." And then, as you can read further down, I think this player in question might have missed a penalty that game. So you missed. F your family. I hope you get injured. I hope you never play again. And your mum, I hope she dies and stuff like that. Now, this player in question was such a nice guy. When we asked how he felt about receiving messages like that, he actually said he felt sorry for the person who'd lost £1,000 rather than actually wanting to do something about it. Now, and that also again shows the normalization that players shouldn't be feeling bad that they're getting these types of messages. Players should be empowered to come forward to the club and say that this is unacceptable and try and um, do something about these types of messages. There needs to be a more open dialogue with the club for a lot of players and break down those stigmas and barriers around that hyper masculinity that exists certainly in men's football. So yeah, gambling related harms and gambling related abuse is something that really hasn't been covered in academic literature, and it is a major issue, and something that we certainly do want to look into going forward. So looking specifically at types of hate, then, as this testimony shows here. So there was racism on there. There was everything you could think of after the first couple of months. When I settled into life at this new club and was scoring goals, the abuse was still coming in, and it's crazy. There were, as I think I mentioned before, there were some players that we spoke to who were minoritized ethnic players who said that they hardly ever, if ever, received racist abuse online. It was more about general abuse, saying you're not good enough or you're rubbish or you shouldn't be playing, that type of stuff. But for some players, especially involved in some kind of trigger event, and in this case, this is a player moving from one club to another, and the fans of the old club were very angry that the player had left, so started to get a lot of abuse from the former club's fans, which then turned into racist abuse. The second one down, so female football in particular, there's a lot of body image, as I said before, and body shaming. There's a lot of sexualization of the women players, similar to what I said on the previous slide. The interviewee in question actually added further in this interview, saying that some women, and actually said a lot of women in the women's game are starting to develop eating disorders as a result of this constant body shaming and body image and sexualization that we see, which is again unhealthy. So potentially, certainly research needed in that space. And the third and final one here is, again, a horrendous experience for the woman in question here. So calling things like dirty whore, dirty scumbag, slag. But it's the way that she actually describes this, saying that it was as if it was a personal diary and I was on the receiving end of it. So it was their personal thoughts that they were sending. And it just shows how open social media is, that you can send your innermost thoughts and send it directly to the person on the other end, and forgetting that it is a person on the other end of this that you are insulting and calling all these types of names. Okay, so as I move on to the last couple of slides before I hand over to Sue, who's going to talk about the ways forward and what clubs are doing. This focuses around the player experiences and the impact that it's having on the players in question who are getting these messages. The first thing I wanted to put on here is that word traumatizing. So this is a professional women's footballer who went from 2,000 to 3,000 followers to then making it in the game to going to 28,000 followers within a matter of hours. We've also spoken to a lot of academy players as well who share that overnight they can go from 1,000 to 100,000 followers, and then start to get a lot of interaction with fans and followers. And all of the things that we've spoken to on the previous things, such as gambling related harms, blackmail, sextortion, all of those things, the likelihood of that, because they're in the public eye and they've got more followers, they're more likely to get those types of comments and messages. So it's really important that we try and plan in advance of this. We're more proactive rather than reactive. Another one. So at the start of my career, when I was a bit younger, I was online and looking through a lot of messages. And then at the end saying it knocks your confidence a little bit. And some players have said that when they're playing the game, when they're low on confidence generally, but the fact that social media abuse and social media negativity can affect your judgment, it can affect your confidence levels, and it can affect your performances. So this is why clubs really need to take this seriously, not only from the perspective that we need to protect and support the players, but you can get more out of your players and get better performances from your players if you take this seriously. It can make them better footballers and more confidence on the pitch if they're protected and shielded somewhat against that online abuse that they may receive. The third one down is just the bold bits there. So I got into a massive slump of reading comments and talking about it with my family members, and it was getting me down. So again, this alludes to the fact that this negativity and online abuse, time and time again, affects mental health, which is incredibly problematic. And again, clubs need to support and protect their players against this. And as I said, Sue does excellent work in that space. And the fourth one down, again, losing confidence. So this is actually a retired professional footballer who then is now a coach, saying that the players were in the changing rooms reading these comments, losing confidence, and then talking about the online abuse in the changing rooms, which on the one hand, I suppose is good that they're sharing and they're talking about it. But on the other hand, they're starting to lose confidence as a result. So there's two ways of looking at that particular testimony. Okay, final slide from me before I hand over to Sue is around this. So starting to link into kind of mental health and well-being in terms of impact. So this particular player, the amount of abuse I was getting, he says, I wouldn't say it was messing with the psyche. He enjoyed parts of it, but it was coming in the hundreds and the thousands. And the player in question ended up just deleting social media and completely going off it until they retired, and then came back on social media once they had retired from playing professional football. And the second one here is, again, I've had some of my senior players come in to me, and they've taken themselves off social media because of the abuse that they've been getting, because they've played badly in 2, 3, 4 games, and the level of abuse they've got has got to a point. I've had one player sit in my office crying his eyes out because he didn't realise how people felt about him. And again, looking at other sports, this is not just unique to football. This is seen in other sports. 2023, we had James Haskell. He took a break from rugby to protect his mental health, and he cited online harms as a result. The cricketer Harry Brook, he deleted social media to shield himself from negativity. So this is why it's absolutely integral that we do something about it within football and in other sports as well. We start talking about it, we do the research, we create outputs, and we try and be more proactive and support and protect players as best we can. And I think that hands very nicely over to Sue, who will pick up from this point. Sue, over to you.
Thanks, Daniel, and hello everybody, and lovely to see you all joining us here. Very, very important subject within football, if not within all sport. Okay, so football's response, to be fair, has been really slow. Just as a kind of a segue into my involvement in the project, is I joined the project just over a year ago with being interviewed myself. I've been involved in professional football for 14 years. Previous to that, I was married to a professional football player who's also a compulsive gambler, and played football myself for 20 years or so. And previous to that, I worked in formal education, so worked very closely with 14 plus up to adults within the social emotional context, as well as teaching. And my involvement in the project was very much around coming in from somebody who has experience of the environment, experience very much of and I'm going to share with you a project we did around social media at the club I spent a lot of my time at, but also with my network in football. And so a lot of the participants would have come through that network as well. So it was really a huge privilege to be able to contribute on that level as well. But football's response has been really slow, and you know, we can theorise around why that is, but we haven't got time today. So I'm going to have a look at, you know, some specifics, and I think it's important to place some context in all of this. And clubs, for example, you know, I mean, it might be very obvious to point this out, but every club is an independent private business, and you know, within the constraints of English law, they can operate their business however they see fit. So when we're talking about a very generalized issue within this space, how clubs respond to that is entirely up to them. And there are no two clubs that operate in the same way or have the same philosophy or set of priorities other than to win football matches, because that's where they see the money lies. But when it comes to social media and protecting their employees or their assets, as they're often referred to, not my favourite word, from a public platform, most clubs don't have a strategy in this area, and they don't have a desire or even a concern in this space. And again, we'll theorise about that a bit later, but most clubs don't invest their time and their money into player protection on this level in relation to social media and online hate. And I think I would add there, you know, having listened to Daniel's commentary there, is, you know, the difference between online hate, online abuse, etc. You know, clubs generally, or those with the decision-making powers and the decision-making when it comes to where resources are placed, will not understand that. They will not understand the nuances and the differences around those definitions. And I think they're really important to be able to look at in depth, because it's not just about protected characteristics, as Daniel alluded to. You know, it goes far wider and much further beyond what's protected in law. Now, whether that's because they don't see it as their responsibility, which is the same, many clubs don't see it as their responsibility, or they don't want to direct resources in that way, or they don't understand the correlation between player welfare and performance. You know, that's another area, and that's an area that I'm very involved with. And also, I think it's worth mentioning that those with the power and those who have the day-to-day decision making around, you know, what they focus on, what they prioritize, where the money goes, is that they're a very different generation when it comes to being online than those they have a duty of care for. So there's not necessarily the understanding that's needed in order to address this, because there won't be necessarily the understanding that it is an issue, and it's an issue that goes beyond feeling upset about what someone has said to you. So I think that there is part of the work is maybe needed around that idea of, you know, who is it that we need to address this problem to in order to get things done. But what I do know is that online hate, as Daniel said, has a huge impact on players' welfare, huge impact. My work really is, and I'm probably a bit more negative about, you know, kind of how I view this, because my job is very much about mopping up the other end, if you like. So I get to hear the outcomes of what these professional individuals have to endure on a daily basis. It's not always around social media, of course not, but, you know, some of it is. And protecting players from it, you know, could be deemed as partly their responsibility, or at the very least, as I alluded to, absolutely falls under a duty of care, particularly if you have players who are 18 and under. You know, online abuse comes into the safeguarding piece of work that clubs have a duty of care for. But equally, you could argue that the duty of care extends to anybody who is on your payroll. And I think also, you know, clubs don't necessarily see it as a way of mitigating a long-term risk. So by providing a strategy and a protocol, you are actually mitigating the risk of those players not performing to their best because of what they're dealing with on an emotional level from online hate. And and therefore it's a great investment. Unfortunately, it's not objective. It's very difficult to measure that, and it comes back into the realms of, you know, where you prioritise resources, etc. Governing bodies, governing bodies are very good at condemning online hate. They're very good at signing charters around it. They're very good at holding discussions with other football bodies about it. They're very good at promoting the English Football Stands Together Against Online Abuse charter. They're very good at, there was a social media boycott in 2021, very good at that. And they're very good at putting together a online hate crime awareness week. So governing bodies, in my experience, tend to kind of take that step back from it, and again, not necessarily seeing the minutiae of what, you know, the damage that it does, and also their responsibility in addressing that. I mean, it's really interesting, some of the themes that Daniel picked up on, and one of them being around, you know, what's available for players when these things occur, when they experience this. And most of the information produced by the governing bodies is in writing, it's online. It's nestled within a 35-page pamphlet. And then there's a couple of lines that's always preceded about what they shouldn't be doing online, how to protect themselves against bad image or their brand, you know, their brand suffering from what they put online. So the emphasis is absolutely skewed towards their behaviour rather than protecting them and even validating the behaviour of others towards them. So by the time that they, maybe if they even read what is being produced by the governing bodies, by the time they get to that point, they may well have switched off because they're like, oh, yeah, this is all about the way I behave, and actually I need some protection here. So there's some work to be done around there, which I will come to. The Premier League put together, I think it was in 2019, and it was off the back of Neil Mopay's experience at Brighton. He was getting death threats, excuse me, at that time. And they've got the nickname for it, I think, is Troll Busting Unit, where players can report anything that could be deemed as criminal, as online hate, abuse, etc., to the Troll Busting Unit. But again, it's only at that end. It's only at the end where, you know, things have escalated to a point where there's some serious impact, some serious trauma being experienced by those individuals. It's for serious incidences. So I think online hate per se is not addressed in a particularly proactive way, in my opinion, by the governing bodies. And I couldn't really find anything from the EFL, and I didn't look very hard, but then, you know, I'm going to justify that by saying, well, 90% of pro footballers wouldn't be looking as hard as I would for information around that online on the EFL website either. And then the PFA, the Professional Footballers Association, is the union. It's the richest union in the world.
Yeah, so no go set defaults by app.
It's the richest union in the world, and they have produced some social media guidelines, which is a 15-page online booklet, again, very text heavy. There is an email address that, if you want help, if you want support, it's called enough@thepfa.com, that you can send your concerns to. And they also do have a whole department on wellbeing, which is online. And it's for anyone experiencing mental health concerns who belong to the union. So as soon as you sign your professional contract at 16 as a scholar, you're a member for life, and you do have that support. But education is very generic. So all of the governing bodies provide a form of education, but it's very generic, and it's nestled within other things around social media. So there's no very specific online hate education and training that is delivered by the governing bodies in football. That's not to say there might be some stuff in the pipeline, but, you know, we're in 2024 now, and it's getting pretty desperate. So I think, oh, kick it out is worth mentioning here. Sorry, yes, that is on the slide. And again, they come from a very protected characteristics perspective. They have an app which you can report live incidences if you're at a match. I know it works. I used it myself to report a homophobic rant by a spectator when I was just a spectator a couple of years ago. I was with my grandson, and I know it works. And what happens is that report goes straight to kick it out, then contact the club at where that incident occurred. And Brighton contacted me, I think, a couple of days later to find out the details. Now, whether they contacted me, I'd like to think they contact me regardless, but I knew the person that contacted me as I used to work with them. So, but I'd like to think that that would happen anyway. I can't vouch for how other clubs use that strategy, but it's there. There's a live reporting app. Agents also provide, or some agents provide, social media management for their clients. So that is a way of having someone in between the abuse online and the pro footballer. That doesn't mean that the footballer doesn't read them. It just means that someone else is managing what's going on, coming in, going out, etc. But there seems to be, or there appears to be, very little joined up thinking around this, I think. There's zero collaboration. And it seems, I mean, you could read into that the governing bodies and organisations appear to be doing what they can, but not necessarily supporting and protecting those that need it, maybe. Or maybe that's just me because, as I say, I get the fallout from this. Can I have the next slide, please, Daniel? Thank you. So that leads us on to our last slide. And just to kind of give you some context of football, it's really important, and Daniel did allude to this, is that it's crucial to understand and accept that football is a very hyper-masculine, toxic, competitive, untrustworthy, and I would say transient environment. But I mean transient in the sense of identity. So identity is not necessarily something that is a constant or authentic within that environment. And there are lots of reasons for that, but it does add to this needing to hide how you really feel in that environment. And it can be experienced as really lonely, very isolating, fearful, quite frightening, very frustrating, and at times really overwhelming. And that, with social media on top of it, and then the online hate on top of that, it's an element of that experience for these young men and young women. I've worked with women and girls as well, but I mainly work within the male domain now. It's very, very traumatizing. And the social media, the online hate element is very difficult. And what I found really interesting about something that Daniel spoke about was this idea that these young men seem more able to come out when their loved ones are targeted. They're more able to come out in a protective way rather than themselves, as accepting of it's part of their job. But actually, I would see that as, one, they can't talk about how they really feel about something because of, you're weak, you've got to get on with it. The common cultural expectations being around toughening up, man up. If you can't handle it, then it's not for you. And getting them ready for the first team dressing room. I've heard that so many times. And my question would be, well, what's the first team dressing room like if you have to treat someone in such a way that you have to toughen them up for them to be able to cope with it? But what was interesting about being more able to come out and protect their loved ones in relation to online harm, for me, I would see that as a projection of their own feelings of the way that they would, of course, they want to protect their loved ones, but equally, it's very much also around a projection of the emotions and the feelings that they don't feel comfortable sharing about their own agony. And it is agony. It's agony. It's a double agony because there's not that they're not able to share what's going on for them. So I think understanding the context of football is absolutely part of this work. And that's what a lot of the governing bodies don't appear to be taken into consideration, and definitely not the clubs. There's this kind of dismissal of it's not that bad, you know, you need to get on with it, etc. And some of the outcomes, we talked about addictions, mental health issues, anxiety and depression being massive. Gambling addictions are huge in football. Self-harm, not just females, but males with eating disorders as well. Suicide ideation, planned and completed suicide. Marvin Sordell was a great example of citing that the abuse that he received on social media was one of the main reasons that he retired early. And he talks about that very eloquently now. And he's actually, I think he's the player representative on the PFA board. So it'd be nice to kind of get him involved with something. And really, when it comes to protecting and supporting, from the work I do, I really see this as controlling the controllables. So there's a lot within this area we have no control over whatsoever. Yes, getting on board the governing bodies, clubs, and other organisations to work collaboratively together if that's possible, but also to accept that there are some things that the football environment cannot control. But what we can control, and that's what I mean by the two-pronged strategy. So you've got the work being done by TOHIF currently with you know, looking at the very organised ways, the measurable stuff, the ways in which we can reach out to the stakeholders in this. But we've also got how we protect and support the individuals, and we protect the individuals by supporting them in different ways. And emotional welfare and emotional intelligence for me is a massive area that will make a huge difference to individuals more than anything. And I think this is the piece of work, this is the cultural piece of work that we can really come into. And I think that comes through working with individuals within clubs, with professionals as through their providing them with safe spaces, robust protocols within clubs that are accessible and relevant. Open, honest discussions, having that paradigm shift when it comes to the
Hi, Sue.
Yeah.
Hi, Sue. Sorry for interrupt you. It's just we're running close to 3, so just wanted to leave a bit of time for questions if possible, because I know there's a lot of people that have questions.
But the last
Yeah,
bit
go ahead. Yeah.
It's really important is that, you know, some of the controllables can also be working with the stakeholders around education training, the EDI piece, around privilege as well when it comes to punditry and commentators, and having people that challenge the language that they use within that space, the allyship around that, and for clubs to be far more proactive and reactive in that space, coming out and being really clear about what's acceptable and what isn't, and what the consequences will be, because I think it's very wishy-washy in many spaces. But hey, that's all just for food for thought, maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's so much here. Like just even for the sheer amount of data that's there, we could talk on it. I'm sorry for interrupting you there. Anyway, Sue, I think it's just because I know a lot of people have questions. I think some people might have to head off at 3. I'm happy to stick around for a few extra minutes if you yourself and Dan don't mind. With questions coming in already, again, raise your hands. It's probably easier, but if in the chat, it's fine as well too. Aidan has 2 questions. One, does comparative data exist on the impact of different supports, education channels for players experiencing online harm? And the second question is, does data exist on the relationship between the increase in in-game betting and online abuse in sport by gender and by sport? I can answer the second one really quickly. There's literally no data, empirical data on the relationship between gambling and online abuse. Well, nothing that's been published yet. I know Sue, yourself and Dan mentioned a couple of things that might be in the data that you have.
I think it's not so much data, certainly from my perspective, it's very subjective, because it's a way, addiction is a way of suppressing not wanting to feel what you're feeling. You know, when something is so uncomfortable, so challenging, then unhealthy behavior will be sought in order to soothe, suppress, dismiss, override those feelings. So addictions in general would come into it, but very subjective in relation to how that correlates to online abuse, I would suggest, online hate.
And the first question there, I'm not sure, maybe you might know, Dan, does data exist on the impact of different support education channels for players experiencing online harm?
Not that I'm aware of. No. I'm from trying to understand that. Is that saying that the types of education and support mechanisms to see what has the best impact for players dealing with online abuse?
Yeah, I think so. It's actually one of the areas that one of our MPhil scholarship students that's funded by the UAOA, Anna, is working on a little bit too, to look at the impact of different education channels, but I haven't seen much on it by means of actual published work.
No, I mean we Gary and the team and I we went for another separate bid, but we just missed out on the last hurdle. And in that we were going to put forward kind of innovative pedagogic models using technology to kind of immerse younger players into a system where they might experience what it's like to see online abuse or face online abuse in a controlled, safe space. And then they've kind of been through it, and then when they do go on to get the pro contract and may end up in that position, it's likely that they've got those kind of coping mechanisms and work through some of that already. But we were unsuccessful in getting that project over the line. But we're hoping to get that out.
Could you ask to mute yourself there, please? Don't know who that is. Anyway, yeah, so one or two interruptions. Has anyone else got any questions? Probably quicker to raise the hand actually than put it into the chat. Well, I've actually just a quick one out of curiosity. Because you say so much connects to the players' families, like both in terms of their, like what actually motivates them to act around online abuse when it's targeted at their families, and also I suppose because the families play such an important role, like in their actual professions, especially when you're talking to academy players. And I'm wondering, is there any has there been any attempts to engage the families or educate the families around online harms when they're when they're bringing in academy players on these issues? Like, how are they speaking to the families about this, or is that just completely separate?
I'll go really quickly and then hand over to Sue, who can probably answer that better than me. In the focus groups we've done with the clubs, time and time again, they require or would like resources to give to family members or parents to help them process the feelings that the players will be going through when they do get online abuse, because most of the time the players go to parents first than anybody else rather than the club. So actually equipping the parents with some further understanding and training around how to deal in that situation, the clubs are kind of crying out for that. So that's one thing that we hope to kind of create. Sue?
Yeah, we did a lot of work around parent training when it comes to social media. So the massive social media project we did at Brighton involved athlete Angel, who came in and took over all that side of it. So we did training throughout parents, every phase of the academy up to the under 21s, and also across male, female, and also the senior squads as well. And within that, the age appropriateness was really important, obviously in delivery, but also then how you approach that, how you tackle it. And absolutely, youngsters are more likely to go to their parents first, depending on the age, of course. As they get older, they tend to then either dismiss it because of the culture that they're in, don't want other people to know about it and that they're bothered by it. So it's about the awareness piece. It's about, okay, so the awareness that this is going on, this is what to do in these situations. And we had a reporting system that could bypass the coaches, which was really important. There was a safeguarding element to that. So we had a duty of care to make sure that anybody at the academy was safe when involved in any of the activities of the academy. And informing parents. Yeah, I mean, there is training and education out there. It's very expensive because of the nature of what it is, but also it's not, it has to be accessible. So a lot of parents don't ever go to the academy, so it needs to be available online, or it needs to also be available at times when some parents will turn up to every training session. Other parents may only be able to get there at the start and the end of the season, for example. So it has to be nuanced in order to fit the culture or the academy within which those individuals are assigned to. So it's a difficult piece of work to do, because the bespokeness is important. Because as I said right at the beginning, every club is different and every academy is different, and it depends where the parents travel in from, even if they are ever at the academy at all for training.
Yeah, I know it gets more complex when it becomes the kind of generational gap, really, too, doesn't it? Maria has a question. Based on existing data, is online abuse more frequent in men's or women's football?
Yeah, good question. It's more of a quantifiable question, is that? And I know we've got Jonathan here from Signify in the audience, and Jonathan can probably answer that as well, to be fair. So I think that in terms of our quantified big data that we've got, which Theo and his team are obviously leading on, it's around about 1% is abusive, not hate speech. 1% is abusive, and that's consistent since 2008. I think we're yet to see whether there's a major difference between the men and the women's, although I think we have started to see those projections, which
there's a few things we've seen where there's actually quite a lot of homophobic and feminine slurs used against men. So kind of unexpected, not unexpected with the homophobic aspect, but the use of feminine slurs against men is quite unusual. But I think the 1% we've seen so far is pretty consistent across both men and women. But I think, Jonathan, I think you'd be interested to hear what your team have found.
Yeah, I can give a really quick thought on that, which is we've done some work looking at the comparisons between what the players at the Men's World Cup and the players at the Women's World Cup, the most recent ones in Qatar and Australia and New Zealand, and the comparison between both sets of players and the type of abuse and the volumes of abuse that they received. And when you do that and you do it comparatively, the women were receiving, I think it was about 29% more abuse than the men. So it was quite significant numbers. That's just going on those two tournaments. They're obviously massive tournaments, but you know we're building out the data sets a lot more. And just whilst I'm here, there was a question earlier about the issue of whether or not data exists looking at the relationship between the increase in in-game betting and online abuse. We're starting to build that. Through the work that we've been doing across lots of different sports, we are starting to build that. So I'm happy to come back on one of these conversations and share some of that with some of the people on here who are interested in it. I see Aidan was asking a question earlier, so happy to touch base on that as well. But I'll back out.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant, because we haven't seen it in the empirical research, but it's reported widely in the media, and we're seeing it by kind of organizations like yourself, the connections with gambling. But so I think you're going to see a lot more of that coming out in the next couple of years, because everyone kind of seems to be turning their focus on it a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Jonathan, I think I'll follow up with you on that one, because we're looking to try and do some more work in that space. So it'd be good to see and have a chat about that.
Love to have that chat. And by the way, great session today. Been really good. Been listening in. It's been great.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the comments.
Any more questions before we wrap up? Okay, so look, I've left a link there for the website of the kind of the TOHIV project from which the Dan and Sue have been and working through in terms of their interviews. So if anyone has any questions, Sue, feel free to get in contact with Dan and Sue and myself as well too, if you want to. As I said at the start of the session, you know, this is going to be a monthly webinar, so we're going to have a look out for any communications around registering for the next webinar, which I'm looking forward to as well. So thanks everyone for your time, especially Dan and Sue. Absolutely fascinating talk on online abuse and the experiences of the actual players themselves, and there's a million and one things I think that came from that presentation and questions that I have. So I can't wait to discuss it further.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.